Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A with Patty Wing Davis. We're so excited to have her here today with us to talk about her new book, It's Too Much. This is a great resource that parents for young children, and actually we were talking about it, it's for young children, but it can be even for a little older children too, because when you read it, it's a great way to start a dialogue, a conversation about being an empath, because this is a story for empathic children. And so, Patty, I'm so happy she agreed to come and talk to our parent community. And we're recording this for anybody who couldn't be here. They can see it on the replay. But Patty is a psychic, intuitive, and medium. She's a spiritual teacher, an aromatherapist, writer, and a co-host of Spirit Speakers podcast. So today, during this session, we're going to get to talk to her about her journey with her abilities and being an empath. And we're going to talk to her about how she dealt with that and worked through that, about raising 3 highly intuitive kids as well, and what brought her to write this wonderful resource that we now have available to, it's available to anybody. It is available on Amazon. It's on the website, the Highly Intuitive Kids website, for our parent community or anybody who comes and visits the website. And so to have her talk about it, the benefits of it, and just it's a great resource for anybody with young empathic children. So welcome, Patty, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Great. So look, we're going to just dive right in and start with, just right from the beginning, because I love the book. And I have to say, I'll hold up again. When I got a copy of this book, Patty was so kind and sent me a copy to look at it. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is really nice. Well, my 12-year-old, I read it to him, and I was like, Ethan, look, let's read this and look at it. And when we read it and went through it, and he was like, yeah, he gave it 2 thumbs up. So I was like, oh, and he's 12. So right there, I was like, that's a good sign. But it did just what I mentioned. It started a dialogue. And so that was I was like, this is a great tool that we definitely have to get out and talk about. So Patty, so we'll just jump right in. So we'll start with what brought you to write the book? What made you decide that it was time to do something like this?
Well, I am a psychic intuitive, and I have many, many clients. And I was having so many clients come to me that have empathic and intuitive children, and they just weren't sure how to help them. And they were asking for tools or ideas. And so when I thought I should write a book for those kids. And I grew up extremely empathic, and I had a father who was very, very psychic. But even though we had a lot of psychic phenomenon happening in our house, the word empath wasn't something we used, and it wasn't something that was addressed. And it wasn't until I was, in my 30s that, I heard that word and thought, oh, that explains it. Now I understand. So I wanted to write a book that would not only just help the children, but would help parents with tools and ideas that they could pass on and help their kids with. So that's how it came about.
Well, that's great, because it's a good resource for people to have for their children. So I highly recommend for people to get it. If you have a young child, it's a great book to start a conversation. So Patty, let's go back. We'll start with your journey, because I think it's always fascinating when we have the authors in to come and talk about their journey and how they, when it began for you, how you dealt with it, because we always learn from hearing each other's stories. So we want to talk a little bit about that, and we'll kind of come forward and talk about more about the book and some of your other initiatives you're involved with.
Certainly. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly when it started, but I just grew up as an empath. I was always extremely aware of what was happening. If my parents were secretly having an argument, I was aware of that. If somebody was sick, I would feel sick. And I kind of got accused of being a drama queen a lot when I was growing up, because if somebody had a headache, one of my brothers, I'd be like, oh, my head hurts too. And they're like, oh, she wants attention or something. So that was just kind of happening as I was growing up. And then when I got to be my early 20s, I actually left home. I grew up in Southern California, and I moved to Colorado. And that's when things started coming in really, really strong for me. I have 2 brothers. And one night I just felt extremely ill, and I ended up going to the hospital, and they thought with my symptoms that I was having an appendicitis attack. I had the blood work. They said, no, you look fine. And they sent me home. they said, maybe it's Giardia or something, and they sent me home. Well, the next morning, my mom called and my brother had appendicitis attack that night and gone to the hospital and his appendix burst. And then I had another day where I had a dream that my other brother was beat up by what I thought was a motorcycle gang because they had helmets on. And it was extremely emotional and a very lucid dream. And then sure enough, the next day I talked to my mom and my little brother. He and his friend actually drove their car over to the rival football stadium, and the coach had the football team attack them. So all these young men in football helmets flipped their car with them in it. So I had this dream, and since it showed up as helmets, I thought it was, I thought it was a motorcycle, but it was a football team. So this is when my empathy started kind of going into some psychic abilities and picking things up. And I started really recognizing how I could be around certain groups of people and feel energized and positive. And then I could be around other groups and feel extremely depleted and low. And then the anxiety kicked in. And I started really dealing with anxiety because as an empath, we pick up on so many emotions, not only from the people we're around, but from the collective consciousness. And something can happen, some natural disaster on the other side of the earth, and we can be picking up on that and we don't even realize it. So a lot of times empaths, we don't know what belongs to us and what belongs to other people. And we can get overwhelmed by all this surge of energy, regardless of where it's coming from, and it can cause anxiety. So I was lucky enough to stumble upon a psychic teacher and took psychic classes for almost 14 years. And I learned to meditate and protect myself and clear my energetic field and have a better understanding of my gifts. And, I think empathy can be such an amazing gift. It leads us to being compassionate and kind and caring and understanding. However, if we're not an empowered empath, and we don't have an understanding of that, and we don't protect ourselves or clear, it can become extremely overwhelming, and it can be too much, which is why I named the book Too Much. And so that's kind of my story. And there's many stories woven in there as well. But, it started happening on a major level, and I really felt that I needed some help with it, and I needed to be able to understand it better. And I still will have times when I'll be talking on the phone, and they'll have a headache, and before I know it, I have a terrible headache. Or I'll see somebody, with a cast on, and all of a sudden my ankle will start aching or anything. But I have gotten to the point where I recognize that, I send them love and healing light, and then I'm able to release it rather than holding on to it.
Yeah, and that's great. I love everything that you just said, Patty, because that's when people are listening to this, and that's an important point for parents and even for adults who may not realize how you can pick up on the pains and the symptoms of somebody else. That empaths are just emotional and physical, feeling the physical symptoms, sponges, and so they just take that right in. And so if you're happening to noticing that with your child, or you haven't thought about it, or I love what you said, Patty, about being considered a drama queen, because some kids can get labeled that way, and so this is great signs that you're pointing out for them. So do you see this in your children too? Well, first, what are the ages of your children? And are they empaths as well?
Yes, I have 3 children. My youngest is my daughter, and she is 26. And then I have a son who just turned 30, and I have a son who's 35. So they are adults, but I definitely saw this in them. And it was so wonderful to learn this about myself, and then be able to take that awareness and that wisdom and help my children with it. And it's so interesting because it manifested totally different in all 3 of them. It's never the same for everybody. Everybody has their own unique way of doing it. And, like I said, it makes them really wonderfully loving and caring beings, but it can be too much. And there were definitely times in all 3 of their lives where I could see when it was a little too much. And I helped them with some of the symptoms with that, because, it can manifest in so many ways. I have clients who say that their children are very withdrawn or very shy or have trouble going out, or I have, trouble in school. Like everything's great, but when they're in school, anxiety comes up. And, the thing about children, as wonderful as they are, they're not very good at holding on to their energy. It's like their energy flies all over the place. I used to go volunteer at my daughter's preschool, and I would come home and have to take a nap because it was just exhausting. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about children. But if you have a very sensitive, empathic child and they're in a classroom and they're trying to focus on the work, but they're picking up on the physical ailments, the energy, this child over here is really exhausted, and all of a sudden they feel tired, and this person has excess energy and they pick up on that. It can be a lot, and it can show up as attention deficit disorder. It can show up as somebody not being able to focus, or being hyper energetic, or being lethargic, or sometimes kids are end up being claustrophobic from this. They fear being out in crowds. Going to a concert, I love live music, but that was kind of hell for me growing up, because being in a space with all of those people in that confined space was just so much. So I did a lot of self-talk and working with myself to talk myself into being able to go to these type of things. And then again, I started, being able to protect myself and share that, hold on to that energy and that protection. So my children, my daughter's very mediumistic. She will pick up on people that have passed. And this goes a little beyond empathy into psychic abilities, where she would have dreams of a family member that had passed, or a neighbor that had passed. And so I would help her with tools with that. And she is a special ed teacher, and her ability to be empathic and to telepathically connect helps her to really connect with kids that have difficulty speaking or sharing. And so she's been able to take her gifts and put that into a place where she's able to work. And then I have a son that deals with anxiety, because he picks up on everything, and he's not quite as good at controlling it, and doesn't like to even look at it really. And then I have another son that was everybody's therapist. It's like his gifts and his empathy allowed him to really have a deep understanding and be sympathetic with people and what they were going through and the struggles they were having. So he had friends coming to him very often that were having struggles or difficulties, because he was able, even if they had a hard time verbalizing what they were going through, as many times young people do, he was able to connect with them in a way that helped them to feel seen and heard, and to assist them. And he didn't end up being a therapist, but he would have been an excellent one if he had chosen it. So that's how it's manifested with my children.
Right. And I love just the things that you said, for people to be able to look at those signs, because even for my son, he was constantly, when he was little, he would just scream and cry being out in locations. We would take him out to a festival, or, like you're saying, a large crowd. He couldn't do any of that. Birthday parties, we just never knew why he would be screaming and crying. We'd have to leave. We might just show up and have to leave. But we started to understand and try and figure it out, and found out he's just an extreme empath. And so those are signs, things that parents need to just, to look at, that kids, when they're acting and you don't quite understand it, there could be something more there that you want to just do some research. And if you know your child's highly intuitive, or you are yourself, sometimes there are adults who don't even understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. So,
It's hard for kids to verbalize, because they don't know, you can't see it, you can't touch it. Yeah. And my children, I learned very, very early on that they could not do two events in one weekend. If they went to a birthday party on Saturday and a birthday party on Sunday, they would just be a mess, and we would all be suffering. And it was because they were so sensitive that going into a crowd and picking up all those energies, they weren't having that time to kind of recover during that. And I used to talk about mine. I used to call it a energetic hangover. I would go out and I'm a pretty outgoing person. I like meeting new people and talking to people. And I would have a great time, even with no alcohol involved whatsoever. And then I would come home and I would feel like I had a hangover. I would have the physical symptoms of a hangover. I would be exhausted. I would feel like I needed a full day to recover. And so I recognized that in myself. And then I thought, I need to monitor my children a little bit more, because I know how sensitive they are to a space where they have that time to recover and that time to clear their energy and come back into their core and reset a little bit.
Yeah, and that's so important. That's great. It's great that you went through it and could recognize it and help your children with it. How did you handle it with school? Were they very sensitive in the classrooms? And how did you handle it with them for the school environments? And did you talk to their teachers at all? What was your approach with your kids in school?
My two boys did fine in school. They were good, and they're active, and they have a lot. One of my sons is really into music, and he plays the drums. I bought them a drum set early on, which I have mixed emotions about that decision, but to give them something to play out, and to use the vibration of sound really helps balance your energy as well. So I made sure that they played sports. My other son's a big sport person, or had some kind of outlet, something that helped them release some of that energy, because we can release the energy not only just by consciously setting that intention, but by doing some exercise, by getting outside, by taking our shoes off and walking barefoot, and I used to punish my children in that way. I would say, okay, you need to go run around the tree 5 times and then come back in, because I recognized early on that sitting them in timeout was that's not what they needed. They need to blow off some energy, because usually when they were having a difficult time at home or acting out, it was because they were energetically overwhelmed. There was too much stimulation coming through. So I would help them kind of work with that. Now, my daughter, however, we did have to do some work with her. Like she had one teacher that she just had a really difficult time with. I'm a firm believer that in life we have people that are difficult, and it's a strong lesson that we don't always run for the hills every time there's a personality conflict. But there were times when she was picking up so much energy from her teacher, or in this particular instance, it wasn't as much of the children as the teacher, that it was too much for her. And we tried having a talk, and we tried working that out, and we did end up moving schools. And then this is something that I did without realizing it. I went to the bathroom and used the restroom a lot during school. And for me, it was a little break. It allowed me to go outside, to have some peace and quiet, to do some breathing. And I used it as an excuse. And I didn't even realize that until I was an adult. So this is something that that works well with a lot of my clients, is having a talk with the teacher, explaining to them that your child gets overwhelmed empathically, and allowing them to take a bathroom break, allowing them to be the child that, goes and delivers a folder to the office, or even steps outside when they need to and takes a few nice deep breaths. Because I think it's important that we respect that. And when we allow a child to do these things, we're teaching them to self-soothe. We're teaching them to be able to tap into their own emotions and feelings and find a way to remedy that and take care of that. And I think it's important for an educator or a parent even to respect that and kind of empower our children, that rather than being overwhelmed and falling apart and having a temper tantrum when you get home, you can realize, oh, this is too much for me. I need a little bit of a break, or I need to go take some deep breaths, or I need to go to the bathroom, and luckily there are many, many teachers that I've worked with that do have an understanding of that. But again, a lot of people need to be educated on this and aren't fully aware of it.
Right. And that's the point of like what we're doing here in the talks that we've been having with folks and getting out in the community and starting these conversations. But I love what you said, because that's something, my son's a huge empath, and he did just what you said, Patty. He would come home, he would tell me, he's like, Mom, I just take a bathroom break at every class just so I can have a chance to reset. And he's like, I don't even have to go to the bathroom, but I just go so I can take a few minutes to take a break. And he figured that out on his own. And I'm like, that's perfect. But I agree 100% with what you said. We started talking to his teachers about his sensitivities and letting them know that sometimes he needs that break, or he needs that space from the rest of the class, and so that he can just kind of, reground himself, and or like we keep him in track to blow off that excess energy. So I think those are great tips that parents can, just keep in mind, and, even suggest to your child. But I think talking to the teachers what you said is so important, making them aware so that they can become part of it. Because a lot of folks don't really understand, or don't really have knowledge of what it means, how it really affects an empath when they're in the classroom.
Yes. And I think for children, sometimes having something tactile is helpful as well, whether they have a crystal, or they put a crystal under their bed, or being an aromatherapist, I make little meditation mists, I call them. And I made one for a boy that, his teachers thought he had attention deficit disorder. And I said, he's just extremely empathic. And so he keeps this spray. He lets the teacher know when he needs a break. He goes outside and he mists himself. So for a young person, having something to do and something physical and tactile, I think can be really, really helpful. When my daughter used to have these intrusive dreams, I would say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that you have a beautiful stocking cap off that's closing your crown chakra for the night. And that will keep those dreams from coming. And like I said, she's, 26, and she said she'll have dreams and remember that. And that seems to work for her, because what it does is it helps her kind of close off that access or that portal to her mediumship so that she can sleep without getting frightened.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great suggestions. And I'm also going to, if anybody has questions at this point, please feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your Zoom hand. You can ask Patty any questions. If you have anything that you can think of that you'd like to ask. So here we go. We have one from Rebecca. You can ask your question.
Hey, Patty. I don't know if it's so much of a question as just hearing you talk. It's just the book I wrote, Let Them Move, is you just said have all these things that like I'm coming from it from an occupational therapist point of view, because that's the way people can hear it. But and Ellen was the one that connected. When she read the book, and she had me talk on here as well about the book, but it's just so great to hear you talk about that and how you recognize with your boys to have them go out and move rather than putting them on timeout and stuff like that, because I think that happens a lot both in school and at home. The adults don't understand that the child just needs to release some stuff, get that body moving. And also just hearing you talk about growing up, it sounds like my daughter who is going through, she's got some pretty significant anxiety right now. So she's a senior, and it's just a lot. And but yeah, she's involved in theater, which is also another great outlet.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And Becca, like you said, with movement, we move, we tend to ground. And when I have anxiety, I don't know about everybody, but for me, I can feel it start at my feet and come up my body. And it's almost like it lifts us off the ground a little bit. And then we're like, I don't feel like I'm supported or I'm anchored or I'm touching. And when we exercise, it helps us come back into our body. It helps us ground. So it helps us handle anxiety much better. And grounding is a great tool for empathy as well. One of the pages in my book, it said, sometimes when it's too much, I go out and pretend I'm a tree, and he's standing like a tree. And that's that grounding energy and anchoring again, so you don't feel like you're floundering.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
I was going to say, and that's why we had Becca come and talk about that, because it is important that movement, because one of the things that happens, kids are sitting all day in school. They're at their desk all day, and they may get recess, but that's not enough at times, and they need to get out and move. And because just what you said, Patty, that is a grounding. And that's why keeping them in these different activities, sports, and just whatever can give them that movement to release that energy. Because once they release it, then they're fine. They can focus and they can do what they need to do.
Yeah. And I want to address, Cassandra said that, oh my gosh, yes, I don't know how teachers do it. I love volunteering, but it's a lot. Teachers are saints. They have so much responsibility, and not only are they there to educate children and get everything done, they're holding space for all these kids, and they're trying to protect and make sure everybody's doing okay. And it's a lot. It's a lot. So my hat's off to teachers.
Yeah, I'm just to add on to that. Yeah, I was a teacher for 12 years, and then I left, and now I'm a school-based occupational therapist. And our educational system is really it's just gonna collapse. I feel like, and I'm so passionate about getting out there, and because like you're saying, the teachers, they're so passionate and they can't hold it up. The system doesn't support them. So there's a place where I would love to, if we could all send our energies, just to support and change and create change. I mean, the pandemic would have been a great learning opportunity, but at least public schools didn't seem to figure out some things that we needed. I hope with it we can. we can create some change soon.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
pandemic was so interesting because I had parents whose kids were thriving by being home, where, where they would have difficulty in so many subjects, and then all of a sudden it's easy peasy and it's lovely. And then there were many kids that were really having a hard time because they needed that energetic connection. They needed that social. I feel like it was an opportunity to help parents not only get to know themselves better and their limitations, but to get to know their kids a little bit better. And maybe, like some of the parents that recognize that their kids really thrived not being in a busy situation, made some changes in the way they sent their children back into the educational, system in ways that helped them and had a better understanding of them after that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It did help to raise some awareness with children, and that was a good thing, what works for them. And I'm going to, you have a question, you can unmute and ask Patty.
Hi, I was just wondering if you had any experience. I know we're talking a lot about teachers in the schools and kind of the expectations, but I also know that once the kids reach middle school, my son is in middle school now, I know that there can be, the whole bullying scenarios that go on. And at my son's school, they decided to have like a big group kind of retreat and put kids in different groups. And I'm sure it was according to, try to balance these groups as far as the bullies with the kids who are really sweet and kind. And I recall my son just saying how intense he felt. And I think it was really very difficult for him. And for some of the other kids. Of course, my son doesn't really talk about it much, so I had to really kind of pull some of it out of him. And he talked about them feeling just so intense in the scenario because it was the bullies, some of the kids he perceives, and they all know who the bullies are once you hit the middle school. And so having one of them in his group, right, as well as a kid that he had bullied, and then having the conversation, and then he's like, and then we watched the movie Wonder, which I guess the school decided was a good example of, the potential with bullying. But I'm just kind of curious about that because I feel like that can really hurt kind of a student in that age range. Because I mean, ever since like first grade and on, the other kids were telling my son how kind he was. And he's very kind, he's very empathic. But I don't know how to handle, they a few years ago, they actually had somebody who acknowledged, a parent who acknowledged that she struggled with anxiety and depression. She got all these bands and all these groups to come in and play and talk to the entire middle school. And it was the closest group of students that I'd ever seen, right, in my life for a middle school group. So not trying to take up the whole time, but I did want to just ask, about a kid who's really empathic, but then also dealing with bullies.
Yeah. Kim, I wish I had an answer for this, and I'm not an educator, and I have a child that was bullied, and it was so difficult. And junior high is such a difficult age that I wish I had something to help you with that, but I don't want to pretend that I have an answer when I don't. But I will say that junior high age, kids are really trying to figure out who they are and what their belief patterns are. And what your son went through with them grouping people, that sounds so difficult, to be face to face with that and separate it out. It sounds really difficult. And I think, in my personal opinion, my uneducated opinion here would be that not only is it important to talk to people about how they treat other people, but there's a self-awareness there and a self-realization. And we know that when kids act out, or when they're bullies, a lot of times they have a lot of insecurity, or they feel a lack of control in their life and they're trying to take control over other people. So this is where I think, rather than forcing people to look together or punishing people, it's more of like helping children connect with their emotions and their feelings and have a better understanding of why they behave the way they do, and kind of take a look at themselves, because so much focus in this life is on the outward, what we achieve, how we treat people, what we do, what grades we get, how successful we are, how much money we make, where we don't spend as much time going inward. And I feel like that's something that lacks with children, is really connecting inside and connecting with their emotions and recognizing where that frustration comes from that brings them to bully somebody. And as far as your son goes, if you have a child that is a bully, that is just very insecure and trying to take some kind of control or feel some empowerment somewhere in their life, they lack empowerment. And then you have your son that is just a very sensitive soul and very self-connected and very kind. Not only is it the bully physically bothering them or taunting them, there's that empathy that you're picking up on, that energy, not only of what that child is doing, but what that child is feeling. So it's a double whammy. You're being put down or abused by this child, and at the same time, you might be feeling sympathetic for them or confused on why you feel that they're sad, or you want to help them, but at the same time, they're attacking you. So for your son, I can imagine that would be a lot and extremely overwhelming and confusing on many, many levels. So, there's so many issues in this world that are so complicated, and we don't know how to work with them. But I think starting with, helping people go deep through all those layers, we need to do that as adults, and our children too, and finding out what that is. And then helping your son know that being kind and being gentle and being caring does not make you a target. It's like that can be an example for others, regardless of what's happening, that you can always come from that loving and caring point of view. Compassion, because your son naturally has that.
Yeah. And Patty, was going to add a little, because everything you said is absolutely, and our son, he went through a bullying episode as well. But even like with Kim, our sons both are in middle school. And it is that hard time. And I know Ethan takes in things even deeper and more intensely than what a kid who's not as empathetic, or empathic. So we're constantly talking to him about, like, trying to keep it in perspective. And like you're saying, knowing that, one, what is and how to take it, not take it so deeply, and just knowing, helping him to connect, just what you said, to his emotions and his foundation, and knowing to keep it a little more in perspective, because he can take it in really deeply, and he gets hurt very deeply, very easily. And it is hard when you're seeing your child go through that, but it's like what you said, it's just really trying to talk them through, keeping a sense of themselves, understanding where the other person is coming from, and not letting it affect them as deeply as it can, being an empath. But,
Yeah.
Patty, I wanted to kind of jump over into something. You are the co-host of the Spirit Speakers podcast. So
Yes.
Can you tell everybody a little bit about that? And how did that, in your journey, how did that come into the process of starting that?
Okay. This is an extremely woo-woo podcast in that we go way out there. I have
Great. I love it.
I have a wonderful friend that started off by getting a reading from me and then taking classes with me, and we became friends. And her name is Judea. And she and I would talk on the phone about all this crazy psychic phenomenon that we happen. And you wouldn't believe this meditation I had. And oh my gosh, this synchronistic thing happened. And one night, one of us, I think it was her, said, we should totally do a podcast. And she and I both happen to be anti-procrastinators, and we just did it. We put it out there. We didn't think anybody would actually listen, but we put it out there anyway. And we talk about all types of metaphysical phenomenon. We go into empathy and auras and grounding and centering and manifesting and aliens and awakenings and all of these things. We just have discussions, and we're both psychics, and we see things from a different point of view. We're very, very different from one another, a lot of times we agree, a lot of times we don't agree, but it's nice to kind of have, I'm sure there are people out there that really kind of listen to me a little bit more and can align with me. And then there are people that align more with her. But it ended up being super fun. And we have over 300,000 downloads in just 2.5 years, which we were never, ever expecting. And we just have learned so much. We have a community there. We learn every time we do a podcast, we learn something new from each other and from our topic. And it's just been amazing. So it's Spirit Speakers Podcast. We're on Spotify, iTunes, spiritspeakerpodcast.com, if you can find it. And like I said, we started out kind of sedate, and then we go some crazy places now. And then we do occasionally have guests. Ellen's actually going to guest with us next week, and she will be our guest on the following one to help with parents of extremely intuitive and psychic children and how to help them and in her experience. So we're excited to have her.
Yeah, and that was another thing I was going to ask. Do you cover well, you're just saying for that. Have you covered other topics for children that people can listen to?
We have, we actually had one called Psychic Kids, where we had a guest who was a young woman that was extremely psychic. And we got to ask her question, and she shared some of her experiences and her journey with other people. And we've been trying to get her to come on as a psychic teen. We'd like to do a psychic teen one, but what happens, I think, with a lot of psychic young people is there are days that they own it and days that they don't want to own it. Today they're cool. Today they're not cool to be psychic. So, it's kind of like with her, she'll be like, yes, I'm open. I'm starting a website. I'm going to be a psychic. I'm doing that. And then, nope, not doing that anymore. So we tend to do more. And then we certainly have talked about our own experiences with our children throughout many different podcasts. So we really haven't had one geared specifically to parents. So that's why we're super excited to have Ellen on.
I'm super excited to come on and talk about that, because I'm just something I'm very passionate in getting the word out, about this to, as many people, so that the understanding can really be there. I just did a little festival this past weekend and did a workshop and was able to talk to some parents and educators who were very open to it and wanting to hear more about it, and got some good feedback on it. So I think the children now are just coming in so much more empathic and intuitive, and it's information that we need to get out there so that parents and educators and folks can just start opening their minds and becoming more aware of it, because we need to start helping to support these newer generation of kids in a different way than what our traditional systems have been able to support. So, it's good to be able to get that information out there.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
So when is that going to be?
Our new podcasts, our new episodes come out on every new moon. And I believe Ellen will be out on the April new moon, which is somewhere near the end of April. I have an Instagram and a website where you can find all of that information. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to mention is that my book is written for a little bit of a younger crowd. And Ellen and I were talking about that because I didn't send it away to have it age specified, which is something I may do someday, but we were thinking like 3 to 8. But I have one client who has three children in high school, and she had them all sit down with her and they read the book. And she said that one of her boys was like, oh, that's totally me. I do that already. I need that. And they said it spoke to them. And I've had adults that have said that it has helped them, because it's just filled with tools and visualizations and ideas to help us understand ourselves a little bit more and take action and feel empowered around our empathy. Because like I said, it can be a gift or it can be a curse, and the more we understand it and learn how to soothe it and clear it, the more of a gift it is. And another thing that's important to be aware of is that we all perceive information differently. Some of us are clairaudient, some are clairvoyant, some of us hear things, smell things, we get things sensory wise, or we just have a direct knowing, or we can it's super easiest for us to visualize something. So when we're talking to children, I think it's important that we word things in a way, like in my meditations, I used to say, visualize or imagine. And now I say, visualize, imagine, sense, or experience this happening. Because some children, you might need to say, put yourself in a golden bubble of protection. And some can visualize that. Some may be able to imagine that they feel that. Some may be able to sense in their body the warmth of that. You know, some people might be able to just go there and put it instantly in place. But I am an extremely visual person. And after teaching classes for many years and having clients, I've met so many people that like just do not have the ability to visualize. And when I suggest visualize something, they're just lost there. And it's the same thing with kids. We, you know, just like it's important to recognize the best way we learn and foster that, it's important to recognize how we perceive information and how that empathy affects us, whether we get exhausted, whether we get anxious, whether we feel nauseous. You know, there's so many things to do. So in my book, it's just a cute little story. And then I weave in between the story, little suggestions on when things feel like too much, what you might be able to do. And the reason why I wove it in is I didn't want this to be a thing. You know, I didn't want this to be, we're talking about something serious and heavy. You know, I wanted it to be a story, and it's just woven in. So it becomes like second nature. Like, this is just part of my life. Just like it being too much when my dog wants me to throw the ball 1,000 times to her. And it's also too much after being in a crowd and needing that space. You know, so I wanted to weave it in so it just becomes a day-to-day thing. And so that's kind of the reason why I wrote it the way I did. And my sister-in-law actually did the illustrations. And so it was kind of a labor of love between she and I together. And it was super, it made it very personal and super fun to do that way. So we need to know our kids really well in order to educate them and help them have a better understanding of themselves and lead them to have that understanding.
Yeah. And the thing I love about the story, it does, Patty, the way you described it is great, because it normalizes it, and you've written it in such a way that parents could actually take this book and, you know, take it to school and read it at story time or donate it to a class. And it wouldn't be anything that would be, you know, like they would say, oh, that's something we wouldn't want to read to the class. It's very simple. It actually started a conversation in the classroom for the kids, but it's a very normalized written book that it would be fine to read to a classroom. And I think it would be great so any parents out there who, you know, want to donate a book to the class or something, that would be a great, or read it at story time. I think it would be a great choice to do that, especially if you know your child, or I promise you there's going to be other empathic children in the classroom. I think the teacher would benefit from having a conversation started with this kind of a book.
And I'm going to jump on that whole reading it to older kids. I brought it home. I got to go on a retreat with Patty. That was very wonderful. And I got the book there, and I brought it home to give to my daughter, who is 18 years old. And she loves it. And she relates to it. And she, you know, she absolutely loves it. So, definitely, it's not just for younger kids. It is a great conversation starter.
Mm-hmm.
And for our empathic kids, it's like it gets to the heart of, and it's like, oh yeah, and like remembering even when they were younger, you know, like how it felt, and not understanding that, and like having something to be like, oh, that is why,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I used to cry when I go to birthday parties, or that is why, you know, those sorts of things happen. So I think it's for all ages. And I do love that it's like, it's just like anybody could relate to it. It's not out there woo woo. It's very much an everyday thing, and great tools for those empathic kids who are like, oh, okay, yeah, that's me.
So, I love that. I love that she loves the book. Oh, there's something I was going to say, and I just lost. Oh, okay, I remembered it. So I have a client friend that is a third grade teacher, and she read it out loud to her third graders. And my first reaction was, oh, it's a little young for third graders. But she said it was so good because it opened up a conversation. She said the conversation started flowing, and she said not only did they get to know more about themselves, they got to know more about each other and had a better understanding of what each other goes through. And then they did little, you know, they wrote about it or colored something or did an art piece about it. And you know, it just moved me to tears. But she said that it really, even though the book was a little bit on the young side for many of them, it really was, she felt a really important conversation and a very healing conversation for the classroom to have. And I loved that.
Yeah, yeah, that's what, absolutely, because it's a very helpful, it's a great, like you're saying, a great conversation starter for any age, So definitely, and I think it's a great way to ease it in, like I was mentioning, like giving it to a teacher or reading it as story time. It's a great way to ease it in, the topic of empathy and getting the kids talking about it. Pete, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I could not figure out how to raise my hand here.
Oh, no, no worries.
Just to hark back to something that came up and that Kim said, with as I've tried to teach my own children, if they realize they're overwhelmed, it's too late. And so they're, as my son is in middle school, my daughter's still in elementary school, but he is unable to do some of the things that he was able to do in lower school, like get up and go to the bathroom. They're expected at that point in time that they cannot. They should have taken care of that at other times. So there's any types of like little energetic routines and other stuff that we try to teach the kids, that I've tried to teach mine to do after each class or during each class to kind of offset that stuff. And it can be a big heavy breath and throwing down your arms or something of this nature to kind of shove the energy away or to make space for them in the midst of all of this other stuff swirling around them. So I will do some of that because my daughter is I discovered in that when she was in school, if she got bullied, instead of reacting and collapsing, she became aggressive. And I was like, oh my God, then I was getting calls about that on top of everything else. So this was one of the things where in talking with her, we realized that, all right, if you feel like you're absorbing this, I realized for my own daughter that energetically, when you're looking at her, like you had said early on, their energy is everywhere. If their aura is scattered to everywhere all over the place, in some ways that makes them an energetic, easy target. And so the one thing that during the pandemic, we started to do with our kids, and then they've carried it forward, is, if you kind of, whether you think of some metaphor where I taught the kids where, how you draw the string on a garbage bag. Well, if you think of somehow your aura, like doing this, you draw it in and bring it in close, like you're close it, or something of this nature, that a metaphor that they can hold on to, where I try to say, what, bring all your stuff back in together, gather it all back together in nice and close. And, the aura just looks different. It has more integrity. It's, and to me, it's almost as if it's not, instead of like, you can easily walk through a cloud, but you can't walk through Jello that easily, and so that's why I kind of say, if you kind of strengthen up that aura, pull it in, wrap it around, do whatever metaphor you need, it's sometimes it's less of a, it's less noticed, it's less of a energetic target, as I call it. And because I can't always get my kids to react how I would like them to do. But obviously that was one of the things that we worked on, and just that kind of pulling the aura in, condensing it, or sometimes just pulling your arms across your shoulders and kind of mixing and crossing over the energy, something like that, that pulls it all together. It stopped some of that. So she was less likely to, it seemed like she was less likely to be bullied. And then if there was an issue, it was, she didn't perpetuate it. So that was one of the things that we tried, but I was trying to figure out, obviously you don't want your kids to be bullied, but I just noticed if we're going into a restaurant or a space or something like that, if her aura is wide open, as it typically is, because she's the mediumistic child, I was like, let's pull this in because we're going into a busy restaurant. So it's the same thing that we do there. So, I mean, I offer that as any just little advice that we've used, that if you work just energetically on the aura, that can really help support them and stand them up stronger. And it just seems to pull some of the attention that they get away from them.
Yeah. Thank you. I actually use working with the aura a lot as an example. I don't think we're totally away from each other, but I do it a little bit differently. I see the aura as our energetic protection, as our field. This is why when we interact with someone, we're not just looking at them and sizing that, we're reading their energy. When someone comes into our space, we know when someone's sneaking up on us. If someone's talking too close, we need that space. So the aura is our energetic field of protection. If we hold our aura tight, and something comes in, it can put us in that fight or flight mode because we don't recognize it or sense it until it's right there. Where if our aura is radiating large, something might come in 3 feet away and we'll get that ripple and be like, oh, hell no, or that not mine, or yeah, this is, I need to pay attention to this. So what I suggest is to kids is your inner dimmer switch. Like your dimmer switch on the wall, you're turning up your dimmer switch. You're letting your aura get bigger and brighter and filling yourself up with so much light that you cannot contain it any longer. And it's radiating out the front, the top, the back, all of that. And we know that, when we're in a very high vibrational frequency, lower vibrational frequencies have much more difficulty connecting with us. If a bully sees somebody that is big and bright and sure of themselves and solid, they're going to be less inclined to bully them. And this is also why, if we go to a party, there's just that one person that everybody wants to talk to for some reason. And they're nothing special, but what is it? It's because they have this big, bright energy that is contagious that people want to experience. Now, people can also use their energy field. People that are insecure can be really energetic. I know somebody that's extremely insecure. They walk in and they suck the air out of the room. They are so big. And they're not big because they're confident and because they are outgoing. They're big because they're scared and because they're insecure. And this is their way of masking that. So, and the density thing, I love what you said about the density. This is where sometimes I say, make your aura a little bit dense, make it a gelatinous egg, like you said, Jello. That's exactly what where if some ripple comes in, you're like, oh, what is that? Before it puts you in a fight or flight state. But there's so many things about the aura. We did an episode on this. It's not only how wide, big, or bright it is. We can have holes in our aura. We can have tears in our aura. Our aura can look like netting where everything gets through. Now with a child, sometimes those types of, depending on the age and the child, those things are harder to explain to them or harder to relay to them. So that's why this particular book is a little more simplistic. But I actually work with a group of teenage girls and they really need help on energy and how their words have such a huge impact on other people and how they're responsible for their space. And so, I would love to do one for teenagers as well someday, but working with the aura is huge. And so I love that you talk to your kids about that. And like you said, I have had one child, I'm like, you have a magic duster. You go dust the dust off, because even if you're a big giant glass dome, people can throw mud clods at your dome, and we want to clear that and keep it clear. So yeah, working with the aura is a great example.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been a good conversation. One other little thing that I was going to throw out, just for something for parents to look at that we experienced with our son, is that it's funny because just like you said, Patty, just getting him to own their energy and just to look at things a little differently. But he would come home and he used to tell us that we would get told that he was like being like the class clown sometimes, being silly, and he would say, because I try to make everybody happy, because when they're happy, I feel happy. When they're not happy, I can't be happy and I can't focus in school. And so that's another thing, just to look at, just paying attention to your child's behavior. So if you've got that child who maybe is, the class clown or is doing that. So we told him, you can't make everybody happy. That's not your responsibility. You've got to own your own feelings and work that out. But just another little sign for parents to kind of, to look at, just pay attention to that. But definitely, this book, this is one that I think is a great resource that people should, consider getting, buying, donating to the school, having at home. Great conversation starter, and then going into the tools that have been talked about today. So start the conversation and look at the tools, getting the tools in place to help them kind of manage their everything around their empathy. So I think you've written an excellent book, Patty. I really do.
Thank you so much. I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to say quickly, one of the physical signs of empathy is we tend to hold on to a lot of them. We could take it in any of our chakras, but our sacral chakra, our lower abdomen. This is the space of our emotions and relationships. And this is where we're processing a lot of our empathic feelings. So if you have a child that has a lot of stomach issues or elimination issues, or if you yourself find that you're holding a little bit of extra padding in your stomach that no matter what you do will not go away, that may be a protection, that you're protecting that empathic space. And so we can look at what's happening with children. And, you know, Ellen, your son is so able to express himself. Amazing. But, you know, not only are we looking at their emotional well-being and what they're saying, but also physical sensations, because we can sometimes use that as a sign of what's going on and help us to address that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. All good tips, all good information. So Patty, with everything that you've shared, it's good to hear that you said you're going to do a book for teens later. So I think that's great. Everybody will be looking for that one to come out too. So Patty, tell everybody your website, where, you know, if anybody wanted to reach out and contact you, what's your website address?
I am pdavispsychic.com, or my company's name is Wing and Ether, and Ether is spelled AETHER. But if you just Google Patty Davis Psychic, you'll be able to find me. And there's some information about me on my website, and then I do readings and classes and mentorships. I was booked out 18 plus months, so I closed down my schedule, and I'm allowing it to catch up a little bit, but I'm hoping to open that up again probably in May or June. You know, and I'm only going to allow things to book for like 6 months. It got a little out of hand, but yeah. And then the book, like I said, you can purchase that through my website. I actually make a few bucks if you purchase it through my website, or you could get it on Amazon or through any of the online booksellers. It's available.
And if you decide to get it on Amazon, get it through our website, because that helps us too. We are Amazon affiliate. So that would be great. So I want to thank you, Patty. This was such a good hour of conversation. And so it's time to start wrapping up, but I want to just ask, have we answered everybody's question? Does anybody have any other last question for Patty before we wrap up our session? Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been very, very helpful conversation. And I think a lot of parents, or the parents who listen to the replay, are going to find, you know, just nuggets of good information that they're going to be able to take and help use, you know, with their families, and start that conversation with their children as well.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for being so supportive. This is a topic that I'm so passionate. I could probably talk for 3 or 4 hours on this topic. So thank you so much for your wonderful questions and for having me. And thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Patty. Great to see you.